name is Barbara Colm. I run the last session of the International Digital Free Market Roadshow that we host together with the Ayn Rand Center in Romania, the Romanian American University, and of course the Free Market Roadshow Tour. It's my privilege to welcome you to join in a discussion with Thomas Bachheimer, who actually has been an Austrian economist for a very long time. He's been trading at stock exchanges in Dublin, Munich, Vienna very successfully, with a special focus on government bonds and commodity derivatives. Thomas also is the president of the Gold Standard Institute. And if I give you a little bit of background, when the euro started, he and his grandmother had a conversation, and she told Thomas, listen, it's the fourth time now that I see a new currency. So what will happen with this one? So you can imagine that Thomas is probably one of those who is viewing things very actively and looking at where we are heading, especially in Europe. And before we went online, we were talking about the enormous amount of money that is being put into the market. I already mentioned it beforehand. It's 3.4 trillion, or 25% of the EU GDP, that is provided by the European member states to solve the corona crisis, plus the 750 billion of euros that is being put into the market by the ECB. So it's a lot of cash. It's a lot of money that we are going through. Thomas, what is your take? Where are we heading? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. To be quite honest, I have no idea where we are going to head. I had some conclusions. My job is always looking into the future. As a stock trader, as well as the publisher of Bachheimer.com, which is in the German-speaking world the largest Austrian economic-based news website. We have around 10 million viewers a year, and of course we get every day 1,000 emails concerning the present as well as the future. And therefore, we have a lot of estimations, but we never could estimate what happened here. And I want to slip into my presentation if you want. Barbara, am I allowed to?
Please.
Thank you very much.
You may.
Beginning, the hope for the memory of a goldfish. That means that whenever you're watching press conferences of politicians or watching mainstream media, one could assume that Corona is the source of all evil we are facing now, and we all have been living in paradise until 2020 in February, and then disaster struck. But that's simply not true. Too many unsolved problems were ahead of us, and I just want to give you a short clue which problems we faced on New Year's Eve 2020. We had first signs of recessions. Major banks were on the brink of collapse. Central banks were running out of their weapons. Eurobonds were almost off the table because nobody wanted to do this anymore, especially not Germany, Austria, Holland, and Finland. The government debt was higher than in the crisis 2008, the combined government debt. Italy, Spain were in danger. Zombie banks, zombie companies were there. A zombie company is a company which cannot survive under normal circumstances, and it's only survivable if it gets help from governments. We had a successful Brexit. Trump was attacking the WTO, and so the credibility of the supranational organizations vaporized. China was on the path to the world dominance. We had a CO2 problem, and nobody had any vision how to solve those problems. And all of a sudden, the Corona came. But before, I'm writing at midnight on New Year's Eve to my readers a New Year's message every New Year. And I wrote this 1 minute after midnight. There are increasing signs that 2020 could be a year of disintegration and therefore a year with major challenges for all of us. So I could foresee some problems due to the facts I told you before. But that's not all, because I'm not a prophet. And of course, I failed big time, because the second sentence of my New Year's message was, "We wish all readers a happy new year, which almost likely will be the beginning of the path into a better world." And so in the first part, I was pretty much right that we get some disintegration, but in the second part, I failed big time. And then all of a sudden, there came Corona. Nobody could count on that. But of course, the politicians who had no ideas and no visions how to solve the problems of 2019 were pretty much delighted with this Corona, because all of a sudden you have a big threat and they can reactivate all the measurements. They were done and they were not wished by the voters and by the public audience. And so the politicians, in my opinion, used the Corona, and for me it's the Swiss army knife, or for the politicians, better say, because now the public debt can be expanded, central banks are acting again, as we saw. The Eurobonds were just on the table. They were just dismissed the day before yesterday when we decided to get into the ESM and to help out through the ESM. There is a cash ban which have been discussed for 5 to 7 years, and it was off the table, but now due to the virus, a cash ban is discussed right now. We have restriction of freedom of expression, legal and constitutional violations by governments. We had this before, and we had this already in the Corona area. China is discredited. The CO2 problem could be solved because we have grounded all airplanes and most of the traffic. And 3.6 billion people on the globe are locked up. Erich Honecker must be very jealous what those politicians are able to do in this decade. So, as Corona showed up, we had a phase. Phase one, it was the politicians did some measurements. They promised to save lives, but they destroyed the economy, which really puts life, as we see now, much more in danger than the Corona could ever do. But the stable lateral position was carried by lockdown, by short time work, which is very expensive, and I will tell you afterwards, by hardship funds, rescue credits for enterprises, and hardly any state knew how to finance it, but nobody cared about that, because the people thought we are so much in danger, we can spend as much money as we want, and this is the best excuse, as I said before, for politicians. The thing is, phase one was at national levels. That means the EU wasn't taking part at all in these measurements. The countries decided for themselves, and I think this puts already the EU largely into question, because when a big danger or a big threat shows up, everybody gets away from EU. The EU doesn't influence the member countries, and everybody works alone again. I think this is a big evidence for that the EU is overdone, or there are some measurements due, or some reorganization measurements due. But then the international work took place again in April this year. Everything was based on 122, paragraph 122, Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. And I want to point out only one phrase. The Council, on the proposal of the Commission, may decide to grant the Union financial assistance to the member state concerned under certain conditions. If the member state is experiencing difficulties on serious risk. But now, there were all member states had serious risks. So it's okay for me that all of the European Union is helping one or two states, but all of them at the same time is very questionable, and nobody was asking here, as well as in the national measurements, how do we or will we finance that? However, we will we finance that. And then there came the 9th of April. This was the ventilation phase where we put some press into the almost dead body. We took the ASM, we reorganized a little bit the ASM, 2% of the GDP, 240 billion were standing there for the countries, and each country could take credits in the height of roughly 2% of the GDP. Then the European Investment Bank was granting 25 billion to finance credits for 200 billions for small and medium enterprises. There was a SURE program with 190 billions, and they were planning on 9th of April to set up a European Recovery Fund for 1,500 billions, which is already 11% of the GDP of the EU. And there was the discussion already about the reorganization of the EU budget due to changed needs. What the crisis makes very special is, I want to show here, these are statistics from the IFO. This is an economic research institute, the most famous one of Germany. And they are comparing 2008-10 to 2019 till 21. And we will see here the GDP growth. What happened in 2008? For example, Germany had -5%, Italy had -5%. The Chinese were still in charge, had +10%. And as we all know, the Chinese were the driving force for the world economy the last decade. That changes because now we are getting into a new crisis with complete different numbers. If you can see here, the budget deficit, the GDP growth is in France almost -10%, and in Germany and Spain and in Italy -10%, and in the other -7 to 8%. And we have to admit this are estimations of April 2020, and they were reduced estimations, I would say, very positive estimations. The same we have with the jobless claims. In 2008, you see only the Spanish people were above the 10% line. And nowadays, except Germany, all of the countries will be above the 10% line. Also with the budget deficit, we had budget deficit not in China, but in each other country. Germany was the best out of China, and only Spain and USA were driving into the -10%. And what happens now? All the numbers are getting close to the -10%. So we are starting now a crisis with much worse economic numbers than we had 2008. Therefore, 2008, we survived in pretty good condition. The world debt growth was getting 40% higher than it was 2008, but we took this crisis in pretty good condition because we started from a lower level of negative budget numbers. The same with government debt. Here you see the blue ones are government debts in 2008, and now in 2019 the government debt. And you see each of them, except Germany, is 25 to 30% higher than it was. But we have to admit there is a better interest rate circumstance. There are better interest rate circumstances because we are now close to zero, which is good for states when they are in debt. And so it doesn't matter if, let's say, Italy goes from 130 to 160 because they had 100 with 3%, and with 0% they have 160. So it's easier to finance. I would like to say, I would like to express it this way. So, but now we are entering the Corona phase 3, new visions. And new visions I don't know whether you are closer to the European community than I am, Barbara, but I didn't experience any new visions. I didn't hear anything how to set up the economy, how to revitalize the economic growth. And politicians who had no idea 2019 won't have even better ideas in year 2020 when the threat is bigger. So we fixed the economy from the catastrophe. We gave it breath, but now we have to revitalize it. And I have no idea, and nobody has any idea, and nobody came up with a good idea how to repair all these things, how to finance all this thing. And let's get me to the most important net contributor, because Germany is getting into rough seas compared to 2008. There are 100 billion euros less tax income, and there are higher government spendings in year 2020. So I cannot imagine how Germany will ever get out of this. And the problem is, even Germany will, due to these numbers, will lose probably its AAA rating. And what happens then? They cannot finance themselves. And the big threat is that they have to finance their debt via ECB, which means we get money printing will be inevitable. I never can speak out this word properly.
Inevitable.
Inevitable. I'm very sorry. I trained this morning, but I couldn't. Yeah, I'm very sorry. So this is leading us into an area where I think we will enter hyperinflation already this year, in year 2020. And this is the biggest threat of all, because due to the credit rating, decreasing the credit rating, and the Germans will have to help out the other countries as well. So they will start in the next quarters with tremendous money printing. And everybody who's listening now knows what is following. Hyperinflation is on its way. Let's get to the banks. Dark clouds over banking system. I got this number this morning from Dr. Markus Graul, who is the most profound expert in the banking system of Europe. And he told me that we have 14% of all commercial bonds are failing. That means 14% of the commercial bonds are not paid back. So commercial bonds, enterprises can only issue bonds if their company and their balance sheets are in good quality. And they are much higher to rate than ordinary credit takers. So we can assume that the rate of defaulted loans will be much higher than this 40%. And there is an estimation of Dr. Markus Grahl, 20 to 30% of all banks' credits will fail in 2020-21. So the equity of the banks is already burned. So why don't we know that? Because maybe you know that, Barbara, but I did not know it till yesterday. The ECB is allowing the banks to put the failed credits outside their balance sheets. So this is commercial balance sheet fraud. And you cannot trust anymore the banks. And this is, in my opinion, as big fraud as the failing working situation and the failing industrial situation on the continent. So balance fraud is now official. So who is taking over? The banks will finance themselves again by the central banks. This leads to economic and legal decay that won't work for a too long time anymore because nobody is trusting. The trust of the population in the central banking system and banking system was vaporizing already 2019 due to the threats of Corona. Nobody took care about what the central banks did the last 2-3 months, but we will all lose a lot of confidence in the monetary system, and the answer to this loss of confidence, will be that giant masses of money have to be printed. In addition to that, you probably have witnessed this week. I think this is a historical thing that happened. The Federal Constitutional Court versus the European Court of Justice. Karlsruhe, where the Federal Constitutional Court of Germany is sitting, made a decision on 5th of May against ECB. They meant ECB purchases are effectively financing governments, they are disadvantaging the German taxpayers, and they are undermining the euro on the long term. We have to state that the ECB bought, according to my information, 2 trillion bonds since 2015. I want to state here a quote of a co-author of Bachheimer.com, and he's a British political scientist, and I have to read that down because this is very important, and my English is not too good that I can recall it. The highest principle of the EU is the priority of the application of EU law over national law, including constitutional law. If German Constitutional Court says Eurobonds are illegal under German national law, this threatens the principle of the absolute supremacy of the EU law. If the EU were to legally introduce Eurobonds and the German court were to declare them illegal, this would destroy the legal basis on which the EU operates. Germany is therefore using the court to warn the others not to go there. And regardless of Eurobonds, Germany has now stated that in extremis, national constitutional law has precedence over EU law. So we are only 2 months into the crisis, and already the most important constitutional law, because they are the net contributors, the largest net contributors, is already saying stop. And according to my information, it was the first time that the German court was deciding anything against ECB or Eurosystem. A small detail on the side is
before we slowly get to an end.
Oh, we are already getting yet to an end?
Slowly, yes. Oh,
okay.
We're already 23 minutes on.
Okay, then let's take it this way. I think we have overseen this. I was taking it very serious when it came out on Monday or Tuesday, and I learned after a couple of days how important this judgment was, because it tells us that the national government, and especially if it's the most important contributor, taking back the law and taking back international interests and protecting their people, it's also a big threat for the EU. And as we all know, von der Leyen is German, and she is the Commission President, and she already was thinking about taking steps against Germany. You have to imagine that. She was quoting this yesterday. So the EU Commission is planning steps against Germany, and this under the circumstance of a big crisis. So this doesn't look too good for us, and under the circumstance that we are getting into a hyperinflation, and Germany wants to prevent that. So in my opinion, the EU is getting to the roughest area where it ever was, and I think the forces will force them, the forces of nature will force the EU to reorganize itself and to make it much weaker, and maybe it comes to an end. For sure, I see the end of the euro within the next 3 to 4 years, and we are getting back to national currencies, because it's, as we all know, for each country better to show its industrial power or its economic power with its own currency and not with a combined one.
Well, Thomas, thank you very much. This was pretty hard stuff that you are getting to us.
I'm sorry, Barbara. I'm sorry.
I know it's a little bit like doom bringers, and I know that you are not one of those. I would like to remind you of the situation that we've seen in 2008, 2009, 2010, and we've had many discussions ever since that. And back then, we were thinking, well, will the euro survive? Or by what means will the euro survive? And does this situation that we are in right now remind you of something? Or is this situation worse than it was back then? Or in what way is it different?
Yeah, I tried to explain it. It is much worse, because in 2008, the government debt were 40% lower. Mm-hmm. And the budget deficit were lower by 20 to 50% of the countries. China was in a good mood. China is not in a good mood anymore. Even their number shows it. And what we will expect next year, the deglobalization will cut China in big time. And so China won't be the driving force. So it's a complete different crisis. We are starting from much worse level into this crisis than we had 2008. And therefore, it's much more threat, and it will take much, much longer to repair all the things happened in the last decade. But we have to admit that we didn't repair anything what was reason for the crisis 2008, because it was a debt crisis, and we have 40% more debt. So we didn't repair anything, and it was logical, with or without Corona. As I quoted on my New Year's post, this year is going to be a big judgment year.
Yeah, but also you also mentioned, beginning of a path to a better world. But, it's only May, so we still have a couple of months ahead. And as you know, disruptive processes sometimes go fast. And thinking positive. And as an Austrian economist, we always should believe in innovation and in creativity, that there will be solutions and that we will learn from that, and that we will somehow get out of it. I mean, you somehow had this doom thing with hyperinflation, and I know Markus Krall, and he's a good friend of ours, and he's been mentioning that with the commercial bonds for a very long time, and he was actually also talking about the zombie enterprises and the zombie banks in Germany already last year, where he was warning. But isn't there a way, and I'm just, because I have to say this, can't we muddle through somehow?
Yeah,
I'm just provoking you.
No. If the Austrian economists are getting into charge, and you are already in charge, of course we can, but I'm really doubting that we are able to get through this crisis unharmed with this political stuff, with these political ideologies we have throughout Europe right now. We cannot fight with this kind of hidden socialism. We cannot get through this. We need new concepts, new ideas, and these new ideas don't come up in such political systems. It's my opinion. I'm sorry.
Well, I agree with you that on that. The question is, we need the voice of reason. And if we look at monetary policies, fiscal policies, and structural policies, you already mentioned on the monetary tool side, we have more or less run out of tools. On the fiscal policy side, there is still something to do, and on the structural reform side, there is plenty that we can do because we have not done our homework. So how do we get our countries, how do we get the politicians to finally do their homework?
Yeah, maybe if the crisis is getting deeper and deeper and the politicians are listening to the right ideas, maybe. But on the next page, but I stopped my presentation because you told me there are only 2 or 3 minutes left. On the next page, I had what the politicians are doing now. It's the SPD today announced that there will be a taxation of the rich in their party program, you know? And I don't think whether this is the right answer to a crisis like this right now, for example, or what did they in also on 9th of April, a study of the Deutsche Bundestag came out, how to reapply the Lastenausgleichsgesetz.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, this is everybody has to pay. Everybody who has some wealth has to pay. We had the last time the Lastenausgleichsgesetz was inaugurated in 1952, and the Bundestag made a study, and we all know how long it takes from planning the study to the end of the study. So they had to start the study before Corona started, and they came out on 9th of April, and they were looking into the Grundgesetz, in the conditional law of the Germans, paragraph 106 and following, and how to apply Lastenausgleich. This was after World War II, to repair the damages, you know, and they are planning this to do now. So they're taking the good money from people who still have money and throwing it after the bad money. I don't think this is a concept which will repair the European Union or our economic wealth. I don't believe that.
The issue will be how do we kickstart the economy and what measures, and especially not standard measures, but extraordinary measures will we have to implement, like cutting taxes, cutting red tape, cutting regulation, making sure that we have cluster zones and special economic zones, that we allow competition, and that not those who actually are productive are the ones who are destroyed or actually.
You're absolutely right. These are the major program points of the Austrian economists. But we don't have the experience that somebody is listening to that. Cut the tax on work by 50%. Cut the VAT, or Umsatzsteuer in German,
VAT,
by 50%. VAT, cut by 50%. Then we get a rocket into our sleeping economy. But I don't believe that these people who are in charge right now in the EU are capable to do that.
I think we should end on a positive note, Thomas. And I think what you mentioned is incentivizing enterprises and making sure that they are able to, that countries can do their homework, I think is very important. And I would simply suggest Austrian economists don't give up. Austrian economists like you and many of our friends talk the language and speak the sermon and engage. And without further ado, I would simply want to thank you for all you do. I want to thank the entire team at the Ayn Rand Center in Romania for doing this great work and for running or hosting actually this TV program, especially Mariela Pascu and her team. Thank you for helping us out, and also the Romanian American University, who are our local partners at this Digital Roadshow event. As you know, the Digital Roadshow will tour many other countries digitally until we meet live again in fall. Without our sponsors and partners, this would not be possible, and I would like to thank them all. And I'm looking forward to welcoming you, not only in Vienna, but in many other places, and debate. But the event today continues, and you will start at 7 p.m. in Romanian with all our Romanian friends who have been part and speakers at the Romanian Free Market Roadshow, who were also speaking in other places. Do enjoy. It will be a great program. I want to thank you again for joining us, and stay tuned, and let's hope markets will work.